At exactly 1200 noon, October 22nd, 2025, sunlight blazed across the western Pacific. The sea was glassy, calm, stretching blue and endless, but inside the watch floors of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, a quiet alarm tone began to pulse. High-resolution satellite imagery had just revealed two large wakes cutting steadily eastward well beyond the typical Chinese naval patrol routes. The tracks were wide, slow, and heavy, the unmistakable signature of aircraft carriers. Within minutes, analysts confirmed the identification: CV-16 Liaoning and CV-17 Shandong. China's two operational carriers were sailing together beyond the so-called Second Island Chain, the invisible line that for decades had marked the outer perimeter of American maritime dominance in the Pacific. What made the sighting extraordinary wasn't just their position, it was the coordination. They were operating side by side, their escorts fanned out in a perfect combat formation. At 12:18 p.m., the radar aboard the USS Halsey, an Arleigh Burke class guided missile destroyer, patrolling roughly 200 nautical miles east of the Chinese formation, picked up the same contacts. The ship's SPY-1D phased array radar painted clean symmetrical returns. The carrier group was moving at 18 knots, heading almost due east. No transponder signals, no hails, no deviation from course. The formation was deliberate, disciplined, and entirely silent. On the Halsey's bridge, the watch officer called it out. New contact group bearing 271, range 195 nautical miles. Likely planned formation. Multiple high-value returns. The captain, a veteran of Pacific deployments, didn't raise his voice. Confirm classification. Maintain shadow distance. Log every emission. This wasn't just a tracking event, it was surveillance of a historic naval move. Across the horizon, the U.S. Navy's At.p.m Poseidon patrol aircraft orbited high, its synthetic aperture radar scanning the ocean below. On its live data feed, analysts could clearly see the pattern. Two carriers, each flanked by Type 055 Renhai-class cruisers and Type 052D destroyers, with supply ships trailing close behind. One look at the satellite overlay was enough to tell the story. This wasn't a routine training cruise. It was a carefully staged demonstration, Beijing's message to Washington, written in steel and wake foam: "We can reach you now." At 12:37 p.m., the Halsey's electronic warfare console registered faint pulses, narrowband radar sweeps from a Chinese cruiser. Not aggressive enough to trigger alarm, but assertive enough to be noticed. The captain gave a measured order: record and continue passive. They're fishing for our signature. Don't give it to them. Meanwhile, the USS John Finn, another Arleigh Burke, operating to the south, adjusted her course to maintain a parallel vector. Between both destroyers stretched nearly 100 miles of open water, a silent barrier separating two rival fleets that now shared the same ocean. The Americans knew their role: monitor, document, and avoid escalation. The Chinese knew their test boundaries without crossing them. At 12:50 p.m., both carrier decks came alive. Satellite feeds showed J-15 fighters launching in synchronized pairs, twin plumes of jet exhaust glinting against the midday glare. Flight deck crews moved with machine precision catapults, armed aircraft refueled helicopters rising for anti-submarine sweeps. Over open comms, Chinese state media repeated the line that this was routine training for blue water readiness. But the location told another story. These carriers were now east of the Philippines, well inside waters historically dominated by U.S. patrols. Inside the Halsey's Combat Information Center, the light was dim screens, glowing soft green and blue. Operators whispered coordinates while the SLQ-32 receiver captured every pulse from the Chinese radar array. Multiple frequency sweeps consistent with fire control search, one petty officer reported. The captain leaned closer to the display. "They're tracking us, not locking us. Keep it cool." Up top, sailors stood at the railings staring at the faint line of smoke on the far horizon. To the naked eye, it looked peaceful, distant ships cutting through a shining sea. But everyone on board knew the tension that lurked beneath. One wrong interpretation, one radio misstep, and a geopolitical chess match could spiral into chaos. At exactly 1258 p.m., a new alert came through from the National Reconnaissance Office. A third larger radar return had just left port in Fujian province. The signature matched a vessel no one had yet seen. At CV-17, Fujian, China's newest and most advanced carrier, equipped with electromagnetic catapults. It was beginning sea trials. The timing was no coincidence. While the Liaoning and Shandong pushed east, the Fujian moved out to join them, turning a two-carrier show into a three-carrier signal. By 1:00 p.m., the picture was complete. Two carrier strike groups operating beyond the second island chain, a third preparing to sail, and the United States watching every movement with the quiet awareness that the strategic map of the Pacific had just changed. There were no shots, no standoffs, no shouted warnings, just the steady hum of radars, the pulse of engines, and the knowledge that an invisible line had been crossed. The Pacific, once America's uncontested domain, now felt smaller, more crowded, and infinitely more dangerous. And as the Halsey's captain stared at the radar scope glowing in the midday light, he said the words no one wanted to admit aloud. They're not practicing defense anymore. By 1:05 p.m., the calm surface of the Western Pacific had become a silent chessboard. From orbit, satellites traced two perfect crescents of wake, the Liaoning and Shandong advancing eastward in precise formation. Around them moved nearly a dozen escorts, Type 055 Renhai-class cruisers, Type 052D destroyers, and a cluster of fast replenishment ships keeping pace. Each vessel radiated just enough electromagnetic energy to announce its presence, but not enough to betray intent. To trained American eyes, that restraint was deliberate. Aboard the USS Halsey, the Combat Information Center, CIC, hummed with low rhythmic tension. Radar screens flickered with green arcs. Multiple aircraft aloft, Vector 105, Angels 12, the sensor operator reported. Looks like another cap rotation. The captain's voice was calm. Mark it. Maintain passive tracking. His tone carried the unspoken order heard on every U.S. destroyer. Observe everything. Provoke nothing. Overhead, the At.p.m Poseidon reconnaissance aircraft made a long, lazy orbit at 3,200 feet, its sensors sweeping hundreds of miles of ocean. The feed relayed to the Halsey showed fighter patterns forming above both carriers, J-15 seconds, climbing in mirrored formations, cycling every 30 minutes, maintaining overlapping patrol zones. Onboard analysts noted the precision. This wasn't showmanship. It was a rehearsal for power projection. At 1:08 p.m., the first spark of friction appeared. A Type 055 cruiser hull number 102 broke formation, sliding toward the Halsey's bearing. It wasn't aggressive, not yet, but its course was direct. In CIC, a junior officer called out, "New heading intersecting track. CPA 3.4 nautical miles decreasing." The captain's jaw tightened. Flash warning lights only. No radio. Minutes later, the Halsey's signal lamp blinked across the waves. International waters. Maintain safe distance. Through binoculars, sailors on deck could just make out the response. None. The Chinese cruiser kept her bows steady, closing the gap. Inside the CIC radar, returns began to merge. The distance was down to 2 miles, a heartbeat at sea. "She's turning across our path," someone whispered. The captain didn't move. "Hold course. Let them blink first." Then at 1:53 p.m., the Type 055 abruptly slowed, cutting her speed by half. The intercept vector collapsed. The Chinese ship held position abeam, matching the Halsey's pace at a respectful distance. The maneuver was textbook deterrence, a warning shot without a shot fired. The message was clear: we see you. were not afraid to close the gap. By 1:00 p.m., the engagement expanded vertically. A pair of J-15 fighters dropped from altitude, slicing low across the horizon. Their vapor trails shimmered like silver blades in the midday glare. They weren't armed for attack, but they were close enough that the Halsey's optical sensors could make out the plan insignia on their tail fins. "They're running radar on us," the electronic warfare officer said. "No lock yet, but they're painting the deck." The captain exhaled through his nose. "Log it and record the waveform." Every radar emission, every frequency sweep was intelligence gold. The Halsey's SLQ 32-volt 6 suite captured the fighter's radar signatures in real-time information that would be dissected later at Pearl Harbor and fed into threat libraries for years. Meanwhile, the USS John Finn, operating to the south, reported parallel interference. Chinese destroyers conducting overlapping turns came the update. Formation looks coordinated, they're practicing flanking maneuvers. The U.S. response was silent. Synchronization John Finn shifted 12 degrees starboard, mirroring the movement while maintaining legal distance. At 1:12 p.m., the most dangerous moment of the encounter arrived. The Halsey's radar pinged a sudden surge, a high-power radar beam emanating from one of the Type 052D destroyers inside the Chinese formation. It wasn't a missile lock, but it was close enough to trigger the ship's Electronic Support Measures ESM alert. A shrill tone echoed through the CIC. For 3 long seconds, the crew waited. Then just as quickly, the beam faded. A test, nothing more. "Stand down," the captain ordered quietly. That was deliberate. They're measuring reaction time. The radio silence between fleets was absolute. No hails, no warnings, only the low rumble of engines and the steady pulse of radar. Outwardly, the ocean was calm. Beneath the surface, submarines prowled. The Halsey's sonar operators picked up distant propeller screws, likely Type 093 attack subs running deep, maintaining an acoustic fence around the Chinese carriers. American sonar arrays recorded everything, their data streaming to classified archives in real time. At 1:25 p.m., the Poseidon's infrared sensors captured a new signature missile exhausts flaring from one of the Chinese destroyers. Live fire drills launched eastward toward open sea. The missiles arced high, detonating harmlessly miles away, but every explosion rippled across the geopolitical map. On board the Halsey, sailors watched distant plumes rise against the sunlit horizon. One petty officer muttered, "Looks like fireworks." The captain didn't smile. Fireworks have purpose. At 1:30 p.m., Beijing state television began broadcasting live footage of the drills. J-15 seconds launching with afterburners blazing, missiles streaking across blue sky, destroyers firing in unison. The commentary was triumphal. The People's Navy now sails beyond the first island chain, securing peace through strength. In the Halsey's Combat Information Center, no one spoke. The screens glowed with the quiet truth behind the spectacle. Radar, ranges, signal patterns, missile trajectories, all logged with clinical precision. This wasn't just an exercise to impress domestic audiences. It was a proof of concept. For decades, China's Navy had been confined to coastal waters, defensive in doctrine and reach. But at high noon on October 22, 2025, that era ended. And as the Halsey's captain stared across the glittering expanse of the Pacific, he said what everyone already knew. They're rehearsing for tomorrow. By 2:00 p.m., the tension across the Western Pacific began to ease, at least on the surface. The Liaoning and Shandong were still out there carving parallel trails through the calm water, but their live-fire drills had ceased. Smoke from spent missile motors drifted off with the wind, leaving only the faint shimmer of heat rising from the decks. For nearly 3 hours, 2 carrier strike groups had executed a meticulously coordinated display of Chinese naval power, a message aimed as much at Washington as it was at the world. Inside the USS Halsey's Combat Information Center, the once frenzied pace slowed to quiet analysis. Operators leaned over glowing screens, exporting terabytes of signal data, radar frequencies, missile telemetry flight cycle intervals, and the precise timing of each J-15 launch and recovery. The captain crossed his arms and watched as another set of figures scrolled across a monitor. "We just got a masterclass in their playbook," he said quietly. Now the question is, what's next? The answer was already surfacing literally. At 2:18 p.m., new telemetry came in from satellites orbiting near Fujian province. A massive radar return had departed port heading southeast. It was China's newest carrier, the CV-18 Fujian, conducting full-power sea trials for the first time. The timing could not have been more deliberate. As the Liaoning and Shandong pushed the second island chain from one direction, the Fujian emerged from home waters, symbolizing the next evolution of Chinese sea power. Unlike its predecessors, the Fujian wasn't limited by ski jump ramps or lightweight aircraft. Its electromagnetic catapult systems similar to the U.S. Navy's EMALS technology on Ford-class carriers could launch fully loaded stealth fighters and early warning planes, expanding operational range and strike endurance. It was the technological bridge between imitation and parity. For decades, analysts had debated when China would transition from a regional to a true blue water navy. On October 22, 2025, that question was answered and logged in the databanks of two American destroyers, silently shadowing from afar. By 2:30 p.m., the USS John Finn reported reduced emissions from the Chinese fleet. The Liaoning and Shandong began gradual turns westward, a slow, deliberate retreat. The exercise was complete. The message had been sent. Still, American sailors knew that every withdrawal marks preparation for a return. The Halsey's captain ordered a final log entry before securing from Condition 3. Chinese carrier strike groups executed dual operations east of the second island chain. Strategic significance high. Operational behavior confident, coordinated, and sustained. The data would travel up the chain from the destroyer to 7th Fleet, from 7th Fleet to Indo-Pacific, from there to the Pentagon. Within hours, analysts would begin dissecting the patterns, comparing radar emissions, calculating launch intervals, and modeling what those numbers meant for the balance of power in the Pacific. For the United States, the conclusion was sobering but undeniable. The Pacific was no longer uncontested. The shift wasn't measured in missiles fired or ships sunk, but in confidence. The confidence of a Navy that now believed it could operate anywhere the U.S. could. And perhaps that was Beijing's real objective, not to win a fight, but to normalize its presence, to make its carriers as familiar in the mid-Pacific as American ones. On the diplomatic front, reactions rippled quickly. Tokyo's defense ministry called the drills a destabilizing projection of force. Canberra labeled it a strategic provocation. Manila described it as a reminder that geography alone no longer guarantees safety. Even Seoul issued a rare public statement urging restraint. The Indo-Pacific had felt the tremor, and everyone understood where it came from. By mid-afternoon, the Halsey's radar showed the Chinese formation shrinking on the edge of the display. The contacts grew fainter until they vanished completely beyond the curvature of the Earth. Only static remained, the sound of distance returning. The captain stepped onto the bridge wing, the noonday sun still glaring off the waves. Around him, sailors relaxed slightly, though no one truly let their guard down. "They'll be back," one petty officer said. The captain nodded. Of course. The sea remembers every challenge. Far above, satellites tracked the Fujian, accelerating southeast engines, throwing white foam into the air, a steel reminder that the next time China sailed east, it would do so with 3 carriers, not 2. For 70 years, the United States Navy had defined the tempo of the Pacific. Its presence was law, its reach unquestioned. But as the Halsey's sensors went quiet and the horizon returned to blue, One truth settled over the crew like a weight deterrence is no longer about distance. It's about resolve. The Pacific Ocean had just grown smaller, tighter, and infinitely more crowded. So, what do you think? Is Beijing simply showing the flag or rehearsing for something far larger? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown eye-opening, subscribe to support more true cinematic naval storytelling from the world's most contested waters. Because at high noon on October 22nd, 2025, the rules of the Pacific changed, not with a shot fired, but with a wake drawn boldly across the map,